Shopify helps you sell at every stage of your business. Like that, let's put it online and see what happens stage.
And the site is live.
That we opened a store and need a fast checkout stage.
Thanks. You're all set.
That count it up and ship it around the globe stage.
This one's going to Thailand.
And that, wait, did we just hit 1 million orders stage? Whatever your stage, businesses that grow with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 a month trial at shopify.com/listen.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this special free preview of our What a Cartoon Movie 4, The Animatrix. I am one of your hosts for this one, Bob Mackey, and The Matrix is telling me this is turkey jerky.
And hey, it's Henry Gilbert. I squeezed into this leather just for this podcast. And yeah, in case you don't know, the change in our schedule for What a Cartoon now is that the final podcast of each month on What a Cartoon is going to be an elongated version of our previous What a Cartoon Movie previews. So yes, the fourth or fifth podcast a month, depending on how many Mondays there are, in each month is going to be our preview for the What a Cartoon Movie. In this case, it is the Animatrix, yes. And that was voted upon by our many wonderful Patreon supporters at patreon.com/Talking Simpsons. And if you'd like to hear the full version of this, that's only $10 a month as one of our premium patrons, and you get access to all of the previous What a Cartoon movies as well.
That's true. If you go to patreon.com/Talking Simpsons and sign up at the $10 level, you'll get access to the rest of this podcast and also all of the previous What a Cartoon Movie podcasts we've done. I dare say, is that over 30 hours of podcasting fun?
I think it's getting close to 50, actually.
Okay, yeah, I'm underestimating it, but now I think we're up to like 14 of these.
14 of them that probably average about 3.5 hours, so
and they're only getting longer. So you got quite a bit of podcast listening ahead of you. If you like our podcast, there are so many of them you haven't heard if you haven't heard the What a Cartoon movies.
Yeah, and this one especially, as you'll hear in this clip, this podcast was a really fun one for me and Bob because we got to re-explore our teen enjoyment of The Matrix, as well as how everyone turned on The Matrix in 2003. And we dive into the careers of like a half dozen very important animators in the Japanese cartoon industry. It's tons of cool stuff in there. You'll hear a big chunk of it here, but if you want to hear the over 4-hour discussion of every short in the Animatrix, you gotta go up to that $10 level at patreon.com/Talking Simpsons.
Mm-hmm. And I really like this discussion because you are a true Matrix head, Henry, and I've only really seen the first movie, so we get some very different perspectives from both of us on this one.
Me and you, we gotta just watch Reloaded and Revolutions together someday.
And I think this podcast might have the most disagreements
I think
that
so,
we have had so far. Friendly ones.
It's so weird because we usually have the exact same brain on things.
Yes.
But yes.
You'll hear us come to blows in the full version.
Not unlike Agent Smith and Neo.
It's a real burly brawl here on the podcast.
But so yes, why don't we plug into The Matrix and listen to this preview of the What a Cartoon Movie. But let's talk about how we got to the Animatrix. So this is the very sped up version of how the Matrix film was made. The Wachowski sisters were born in the late 60s in Chicago to a couple of kind of artsy parents. They were assigned male at birth, but they both identify as Lily and Lana now, and that's the only names I'm going to be using on this.
I'm really glad that we, as a society, for the most part, have gotten over giggling about them.
Yeah.
Because I just remember in the past when we were not as, informed about trans people, there'd be like the Wachowski brothers. Brother and sister, snicker, snicker. You would even see that in like articles and things like that. It was really lame.
Yeah, I think I remember in like 2008, Rolling Stone wrote an article that now is just like outing Lana for her transition. Is just like, leave her the fuck alone, dude. Like, but yes, the the sisters, as they were reaching their teens in the late 70s, early 80s, they were very much the typical nerds that, like a lot of Matrix fans are. Like, I can identify with a lot of these things. They were super into comic books and Dungeons and Dragons and other tabletop role-playing games, sci-fi novels by like Philip K. Dick and William Gibson, Hong Kong action films starring by John Woo and Chow Yun-fat and Jackie Chan, video games. Like I think a huge part of the Matrix appeal is like they were the first gamer directors of a movie. Like no real gamers had made an American big budget film before.
And now like 80% of games rip off the Matrix because every game has a slowdown mode, a bullet time mode since 2001.
It's such a cool mode though. But
no bullet time in any of these shorts though.
There's two. I counted two.
Really? Okay.
But neither involve a bullet, but they do involve slowing down and turning the camera. There are a couple of those.
I guess we can count those.
And they were also, the sisters were super into the burgeoning market of uncut anime and manga that was starting to be released in the US in the 80s. We talked a ton about this in Bubblegum Crisis and our Akira podcast, but it was just from a United States perspective, manga was brand new. Uncut anime and manga was brand new to us in the 80s, and it was a real eye-opener for us. And as they finished college in the 80s, they were both struggling to find themselves like what their job was going to be. They had all these creative dreams. They wanted to be comic creators, first of all. They actually wrote several books in the quickly defunct Marvel Mature Readers line in 1993.
Oh, okay.
Like Clive Barker was doing a run of books then.
Interesting.
But Marvel, once the comic book market busted in 93, they were like, what are we doing with these mature things? Only Spider-Man comics. So they canceled it and the door closed on them, which honestly good because that led them out of the, underpaid, sad world of comic creating into the real creative world of film making. So it's 1994, Quentin Tarantino and Steven Soderbergh, they are leading the charge of new auteur filmmakers, young writers and directors who are making hip movies. Warner is getting into the business of that, so they want to buy scripts from some cool young folks, and that included the Wachowskis' script for the 1994 film Assassins, which is only remembered now for the Antonio Banderas gif of him like looking at the ceiling and touching his mouth. Yeah,
that's from that. Okay, yeah.
Now, the Wachowski sisters said that it was heavily rewritten by Richard Donner, and they don't really like even having their names on it. And it taught them that if they were going to make another film, they needed to sell a script that they would also get to direct. And that's why they started working on their next script. Actually, both concurrently, they sell Bound and The Matrix at the same time, but they get to make Bound, I feel, as a way of showing the film studio that they could make a film themselves and not like waste a bunch of money. And that was also the first time they worked with producer Joel Silver, who was a big believer in the Wachowskis. If you watch Bound now, I read, I haven't seen it. Actually, I've never seen it in full.
I've never seen it in full.
But I've read an interview last year with Gina Gershon and Jennifer Tilly remembering it, and they're just like, they reflect on this story of a same-sex couple ripping off the mafia as being, so exciting and daring then that the Wachowskis were very insistent on it being a lesbian relationship in it. Like some people were like, well, make the movie, but only if the Gina Gershon's character is a man. And they're like, no, we're going to make it about women. And Gershon was reflecting of just like, oh, well, now that they've transitioned, I kind of understand more why they wanted to make Bound than just as like, it was not two horny men making a lesbian rom-com.
No, it's weird that I will say they don't have like the male gaze in their works because of who they are and their identities. So it's weird when you see like a cis male gaze in these shorts sometimes, and you're like, this feels so wrong because that's not their perspective.
Yeah, there's a couple shots like that. They're like, if you watch like Reloaded and Revolutions, they go even more into it. Like androgyny is a very big part of the world of the Matrix. Like in the real world, everybody mostly just wears the same clothes. It's not very gendered clothes. Most people are like cast for androgynous looks and also, biracial or just like multicultural looks to them. Like the world of the Matrix is impressive in its casting of just like every movie was just a bunch of white people, and here they cast a very eclectic group of actors in their films.
Yeah, and Carrie Ann Moss was not a traditional like Hollywood bombshell to put in your action movie either.
Yeah. I think they had a lot of thoughts on gender even then, and I not to skip ahead, but there was in 2016 Lily Wachowski gave a presentation where she said like, oh, well, now that we both transitioned, people all are starting to see things in our old work. And we're like, oh, I guess that was there. But they didn't even know it then, they said. But yes, so their next film after the modest success of Bound, they pitch this incredibly ambitious film, and a big part of its influence would be cyberpunk anime like Akira and Ghost in the Shell. I read one quote from a Production IG person, the production company behind Ghost in the Shell, and that guy alleged that like they probably just played Ghost in the Shell clips for Warner executives to be like, this is the thing we want to do. See, it's like this.
You'll make a version of this in 20 years.
It'll take them that fucking long. And also one of my favorite things about the creation of the Matrix is they did something that nobody did at the time, a fully storyboarded script, 600 pages long.
Oh, that's great.
Basically a full comic book by professional comic artists Steve Scrocci and Jeff Darrow. Like them doing a full film script, they had to be getting paid a shitload of money because they were the top dudes in comics. Like Scrocci had just been the main guy on Amazing Spider-Man, which is the top gig in Marvel, and Jeff Darrow had been doing Big Guy and Rusty with Frank Miller for Dark Horse. Like these two were two of the best artists at the time, and if you know their comics, you can see so much of it in the original Matrix world, and for both of them, it kind of got them out of the ghetto of comic books into modern filmmaking. So they sell it, they make the Matrix, and it couldn't have been bigger. Like, it's hard to talk about its impact it had just on, like, every movie that came after it, every parody that happened after it, every video game that had to imitate its look, everything.
You could not avoid a Matrix parody between like 2000 and 2005, maybe. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It was crazy. I mean, now they're kind of embarrassing because the joke is just like, what if Bullet Time but Shrek? But
the Shrek one is like both the most memorable and the worst, I think. Yeah, and also like just think about how fight scenes in mainstream American films had to level up to match the Matrix, because if you watch just a regular like fist fight that's in, say, the first Lethal Weapon, you're like, this looks lame compared to all the wire foo we were getting to see in 1999.
Just two meatheads pounding on each other.
Though I think I'm not saying that's even a bad fight scene, but it's hard to compare to the wire fu ballet, and I think it made mainstream a whole lot of ideas that nobody was thinking about then, and it had a real punk edge to it, and the whole before it was a bad word, red pilling idea was a good one. I liked it. It was an interesting, clever one,
and it just snuck in under the Columbine wire, I'm guessing,
by 2 months.
That's what I thought. Yeah, so trench coats had just a few months of being cool.
When rewatching the original Matrix last week, seeing Keanu Reeves unfurl his trench coat and pull out a bunch of guns and then shoot a bunch of people, I can understand why assholes were making the connection from Columbine to that 2 months later.
I just remember when Conker did that, and Conker's Bad Fur Day.
That took him. That was 2 years later. I was like, Matrix. Yeah, I remember now. And yeah, also I think the drive to question reality was a very punk idea that I think a lot of Matrix imitators kind of forget. It really spoke to like the .com boom era. So after 1999 was so fully defined by it, it created this whole new wave of creatives, and the Wachowski sisters were really ready to take advantage of that and to keep running. Like you can do whatever you want after a success like The Matrix, at least with your one next film, and that has to be a success too. But they had a lot of capital to spend, and another thing that really helped it was The Matrix came at the perfect time for DVD.
Yes,
many people's first DVD was The Matrix, I think,
especially the anime on DVD boom at the time. That's how I became a professional writer, because so many things were being put on DVD and so many websites needed people to review everything because I guess there was still ad money on the internet. There's not anymore.
Oh, not anymore.
But
no,
there was back then, and that's how. And when I was 18 in 2001, I became a professional writer by reviewing anime DVDs.
The change from VHS to DVD for anime it really opened up the world of anime viewers and would eventually kill it. But, at the start, pretty cool. Not unlike in Second Renaissance. Like, well, it started good and then it all fell apart. The Matrix DVD was so popular, it would ultimately sell 30 million copies.
30 million of those snapper cases in every dorm room in the early 2000s, just disintegrating in bong water and disgusting beer.
And so, by the start of 2000, they are going to do their very ambitious plan of doing 2 sequels filmed concurrently, which nobody did back then. Well, I guess actually Back to the Future did do that. But other than that, and they were going to make a full video game that would also be like an interquel to Reloaded. It would be taking place at the same time as Reloaded, which if they had gone with somebody who wasn't Dave Perry and Shiny, I think it could have been a good game.
Famously bad, famously not good.
And they were also going to do an anime adaptation of their films. Originally, they wanted to do it as a TV series, actually, but it all came from the idea of doing the Animatrix as part of their big rollout. Would be they'd give back to the anime industry that gave them so much inspiration in the first place. And you can even see the Wachowskis, even then, they did no interviews. Like, you couldn't find them anywhere. They were very intentionally reclusive, but they've said it had nothing to do with their lifestyle, sexuality, none of that stuff. It was only because they wanted the films to represent themselves. They didn't want to answer questions about what stuff meant. You know?
That makes sense.
But yeah, you can even see in 1999, I found a Famitsu interview where they were in Japan meeting with Hideo Kojima, and they're just talking to each other about how they're like, Kojima saying, I love The Matrix. Oh my God, great movie. I've been thinking of doing the same thing, which you really will do 2 years later in Metal Gear Solid 2. And then
oh God, yeah.
Then the Wachowskis come back to him of just well, we had the same idea. We wanted to do, the first thing we did when we finished all the press tour was to play Metal Gear Solid in 1999.
Metal Gear Solid 2 is such a reaction to The Matrix. It's crazy. So directly influenced. It's all an illusion, what you're doing.
Yeah. Especially when I love the Hideo on the screen instead of video. But so they're in Japan, they're doing a press tour, and so they're starting to take meetings with people to get it made. Now, the TV show concept was what they originally wanted to do, but for budget reasons and time reasons, and I think, you can see that none of the directors wanted to work in a 22-minute medium. They wanted to be 7 to 10 minutes. Warner Video was like, oh, also DVDs are selling so well, just make this a DVD release. And also, if they're 7 minutes long, some of them can just be released online ahead of time as promotional materials for Matrix Reloaded. So they end up going with that. I do think, it was ambitious, but one thing that hurt Animatrix was that the Wachowskis were doing a global production at the same time as directing 2 movies and overseeing a video game, all from Australia. It sounds like a pain in the ass. And a key figure in the production of this is Michael Arias, who he is a visual effects artist who worked on The Abyss. He's one of the guys who, the Abyss water texture thing. It kind of predates the liquid metal of T2. He was a real pioneer of visual effects and CGI. In the 90s, he moved to do a startup called Soft Image in Tokyo. So he was the perfect, unique snowflake they needed for this. He was a longtime industry professional in the world of visual effects who also was deep in the anime industry and spoke Japanese and could be both translator, localizer, and producer, the bridge between the two. Michael Arias, I don't think Animatrix could have happened without him involved in this.
I was wondering how all the communication happened between the Wachowskis and these Japanese creators and how difficult that would be.
Yeah, Arias even does some of the translation of the interviews that were on the old websites for what is The Matrix. I think the only one he wasn't involved in was Osiris, because that has its own interesting filmmaking journey.
I really want to hear about that.
But yeah, I think Arias really helped indicate what the Wachowskis' vision was to the animation studios. Plus, he's a giant weeb. I think he helped pick several of the directors, one to his great regret, I will say, I think. But yeah, Arias would actually go on to work a ton in the anime industry and in the American film industry. I believe his biggest thing was he directed the film Tekkon Concrete. If you remember that one. Yeah, that was an all right film. I like the comic black and white. It was a good adaptation, but I think I like the comic more.
I did read the comic a long time ago.
And also all the music was composed by Don Davis, the composer of all the Matrix films. So that's why the sound is very, of the type. Like, I'm glad they didn't go with a different composer.
I really enjoyed it. I will say the song over the credits is very laughably bad. It's just like not interesting techno with just sound voice samples over it of different things you heard.
It felt like that was Don Davis in the afternoon. He was like, "Oh crap, we got to have credits for this."
I need 7. I mean, there's so many credits. It's like an 8-minute or 7-minute credit roll. So yeah,
it felt last minute for sure. That will not be the song ending this podcast. By the way, I'm going to be playing Rage Against the Machine as is Matrix tradition. And so, there was a staggered release of it with, Osiris coming out as a theatrical short. Then a couple put out online as promotional material like in March and April. But then in June was the full direct-to-video, direct-to-DVD release of it. And it wasn't as big as Warner definitely hoped for. I think it was the mixed reaction to Reloaded that kind of soured the release of Animatrix. Yeah,
I wonder how many more it would have sold if this came out in like April or March or something like that.
If they had got it out in time for the pre-release of it like that, well, I think it would have sold twice as much off of just the excitement. After you've seen Reloaded, I think you're less into seeing all these little clips from it as you are when you're so hyped for more Matrix. As they say, a couple of these came in late enough that was like there was no earlier they could release the full set of Animatrix than when they did in June.
And the version that's on Amazon is the cinematic version, and it does not lead with Flight of the Osiris. In fact, it comes last. And I'm wondering, were they leading with that because it was the most technologically impressive of the time? Putting that out first?
I think it was that, but it is also the one that leads the closest into Reloaded.
Yeah.
Like, if it's the thing you're watching before you watch Reloaded, it takes place, like, basically 2 hours before the start of the film Matrix Reloaded. So I'm wondering if they saw it as more of just like, well, you just saw Reloaded, so watch this on the DVD. But, I mean, now, when you watch it, the theatrical order of starting with Second Renaissance makes way more sense. Like that's obviously where you begin. And then if you end with Osiris, and that works better, it's just like, now that you've watched Osiris, now it's time to watch Matrix Reloaded in this film marathon you're theoretically doing. But yeah, the Animatrix in the end didn't sell a ton, but I do think it has an underappreciated legacy just because it created a bridge between U.S. film studios like Warner Brothers and anime production houses that did not exist before. Like, it just created networking opportunities that weren't really there until that time. Like, you wouldn't have seen Kill Bill have anime in it, I don't think, with Animatrix. Or you definitely wouldn't have seen like the Batman and Halo Animatrix versions themselves, Batman Gotham Knight and Halo Legends, that are also anime anthology films. Some by the same studios who did this.
I was thinking that even in 2003, with anime exploding in the West and, being on Cartoon Network and seeing all these DVD releases, I still think there was some stigma about anime that I think that is just completely gone now, unless you're like over 40 and be like, oh, those pervo cartoons. Like, I do feel like that was also stopping people from being interested in this. Like, oh, anime, pervo cartoon. Like, I don't want to watch that pervy crap.
That's true. You know what? I think after Reloaded, enough people had turned on Matrix that they also, you're right, we're like, I don't want to take the extra journey from this popular live action sci-fi film to the next logical step of anime based on it. Like, I do love the pun of Animatrix. Like, I'm glad they didn't.
Perfect.
I'm so glad they did that instead of like The Matrix, the anime anthology or whatever.
Or the Peggy Hill, the Anime Matrix. It's very much a Propaniac's name.
I love Propaniacs. Yeah, no, Animatrix is really clever. The other ones weren't as clever. I do think this at least was a furthering of the, relationship between American anime fans and the Japanese producers of Japanese animation that we all love. Like, I think sometimes that caused friction in the productions, but mostly I think they understood each other. All right, why don't we go into the first? So we're doing this one a little different than most of our What a Cartoon movies. We're going to go short by short and talk about the history of that specific short and the creators on it, and then talk about the short, and then move on to the next short, history and clips and all that.
And then give it a letter grade.
Yeah, you know what? We should do that.
I was just kidding, but why not?
Well, why don't we start with where the theatrical cut goes, the Second Renaissance, parts 1 and 2. Now, this was the first story conceived for the Animatrix as well. And there's a real split on the Animatrix film. 4 of them are from stories written directly by the Wachowski sisters. The other 5 are pretty much written by the director or a writer and director combo, and that gets the okay from the Wachowskis to exist in that world. So Renaissance is one of the 4 that's written directly by the Wachowskis, which is why it follows the tone a bit closer, I think.
Now, I will say up front, I'm going to be a tiny bit cranky about these first 2 shorts. I like the other ones way more than these. I thought I was in trouble watching these first 2 because they give me the invitation to be pedantic, where the robot takeover is like far too literal, and what you expect exactly, like, oh, they were mean to the robot butler. There's a literal robot uprising. There's a war. Like, I wish there was something more creative than that, because then I start asking all these questions like, okay, why did you program robots to feel resentment? Why did you program robots to have a sense of justice? Like, you ask all these questions and it doesn't make sense. It just feels like very, and Terminator-y, like it just echoes to, like, The Matrix is so original to me. This echoes so much of other robot versus human stuff I've seen that it just doesn't really speak to me, And then I ask all these questions, and then I'm like, well, I kind of like that it's a horror story too, but also I don't want to see how this happened. I'd rather this just be lost to time. Like, we don't know. Yeah. We just know this is the state of the world now.
I think I like this one a little more than you because I was a continuity dork who liked to have it finally explained exactly the fall of man. Though it also is discontinuity because in The Matrix, Morpheus says, we don't know who started the war, but we know who darkened the skies. It was us. Like, so.
See, I like that.
That implies that anybody who lives in Zion doesn't know how it happened. But this is the Zion archives of the humans. So it implies that humans do know what happened. And that is a bit of discontinuity there, I'd say.
I was just thinking of the Patton Oswalt bit. So this is not as bad as Star Wars Episode 1. But the Patton Oswalt bit is like, I like the things I like. I don't need to see where they come from or how they're made. Like, I like ice cream. I don't need to see a picture of rock salt.
How about some rock salt?
Exactly. But yeah, that's what I was thinking during this. It's just like, oh, you're answering all these questions and it just is bringing me down. Bringing me down, Matrix.
I think it speaks to where the Wachowskis were at creatively then, that they're like, oh, we love our history so much, we want to fully explain it. And I mean, this also, though, does fit with what they've been doing in the comics. The B166ER trial, that's a whole comic into itself by Jeff Darrow, which this pretty much follows exactly, but from a different angle. But the director really worked hard to stay within the Wachowskis' frame that he'd been given.
I will say that they are giving people exactly what they wanted. And when I tweeted about watching this movie last night, so many people like this. So I'm definitely the odd man out on this. But I just feel like I didn't need to know these answers, but also I feel like the narration, so many of these shorts are so strong because there's no narration, there's barely any dialogue. I was just thinking while watching this, like, I get what's going on without you telling me, like, literally, it would have been stronger if it was just like a bunch of images of like, and then it would even be more like the movie, like, we don't know what happened, but here is like a collection of images or scenes that might tell you, like, make up your own mind. But this is their idea. And clearly I wanted this to go in a different way. So,
but think of the poor Wikipedia movie editors, Bob, who need a narrator to tell them exactly what's happening.
I understand. It's made for them, so not made for me.
So this was animated by Studio 4C, which that is 4 Celsius, which is I believe, some temperature that water is at its most like solid or something. I don't know. Look, I live in America. We have Fahrenheit, not Celsius.
The freezing point is 0 C.
Yeah, well, whatever 4C is, but it is a production studio that I think they were probably going to be given the whole thing, but instead they do 5 segments. So more than half of the Animatrix is by Studio 4C, which they are like big names, though they didn't actually do their own production for a few years into their lifespan. So 4C was founded in 1986, and they worked on a lot of stuff, including Animatrix precursor, the anthology film Robot Carnival.
Oh, yeah.
Which has, there's a lot of spiritual connections to that. But their 4C's first big production that was all them was the anthology film Memories, which I love that anthology film.
If you go back to our Akira episode, we talk all about the anthology films of the 80s and early 90s that were really big in Japan.
And Memories, all 3 were overseen by Katsuhiro Otomo, though he only directed one of them, but he wrote the other 2. And I'll touch on Memories a bit more later. And Mihiro Maeda, he's more of a freelancer who actually kind of worked out of 4C for this production. He's one of the young animators, well, not so young anymore, but in the 80s, he was one of the young animators of the Gainax generation. In our Evangelion podcast, you heard me talk about Daikon 4. He was an animator on that. And he did just a ton of more character design than direction. He did direct an episode of Nadia, but his biggest names, at least of stuff Americans know, was more character design or mech design work on Escaflowne, and he did two of the Angels in Evangelion.
Okay.
He also did that.
That is a name I've heard before just because of all the big shows he's worked on.
And he did animation on several Ghibli films. But right before Animatrix, his big work was as series director on Blue Submarine #6, which did you see that? I did not watch that.
I just remember it being very pretty, but also very boring and some bad early Japanese CGI.
Yeah, see, when you look at it as a 1998 anime that had CGI, it's impressive that it even has it, but it's still it looks so basic. I don't want to say ugly, but just very undetailed.
They weren't there yet. They shouldn't have went there.
But you can see why Maeda, with that kind of background, they also are just he's a perfect director for this 2D, 3D animation matchup that we want to do with the Animatrix. And it put him ahead of the curve of a lot of anime directors who knew how to work with 2D and 3D. So it makes sense that he would be the first hire. Maeda himself is drawn to the novelty of doing an American co-production because he'd never done that before. To work off of an English language script by 2 American writers was not anything he'd ever done, which he would then come to say was very taxing, and he would never do it again afterwards. Wow. He said that it took him, this 19 minutes of footage was originally supposed to only be 7 minutes, but it just kind of grew. He embellished it, and you'll see, there's a lot of embellishments in this that made it longer. And he, other than a couple of the robots that had appeared in other things, every new mecha in this are fully designed by Maeda, including the instructor, the Buddhist kind of figure. That was all Maeda's work. Okay. And he also he did respect, though, Jeff Darrow's design of B166ER, which he, treated very respectfully and used as a starting point for a lot of his other designs. And he also worked a lot with CG director Akiko Saito. She really headed up a lot of making sure the CG was executed with their team. Yeah, his next thing after this would be a project I really kind of wish I'd watched. It was a futuristic adaptation of Count of Monte Cristo.
Oh, I've seen it all. It's great.
Oh, okay. I got to see that thing.
Gankutsu.
That's right.
Yes. That got me to read the 1,300-page novel.
You actually? Oh,
I
my
read
God,
it. The new translation. It's my favorite book, I think.
Really,
Yep.
man. It's about revenge on fake friends.
Yes.
That's what I like about it.
About fake friends and haters. But yeah, that Gankutsu, I believe, is I think it's all on YouTube for free, like
Really?
legally.
Oh.
It's somewhere streaming for free. It's
All
really,
right.
really, really
I'd
good.
check that out.
And it looks brilliant.
And also after that, he's done a lot of like a big animator in segments of like he did several of the scenes from Kill Bill's anime segment. He did animation on more recent film shows like One Punch Man and Kill la Kill, which we did on What a Cartoon. And he was one of 4 co-directors on the 3rd Ava Rebuild film as well. And he also has like concept artist credit on Mad Max Fury Road. So,
Oh wow, damn.
yeah, Maeda he gets around. He's still pretty at it. They talk about him in the extras in a funny way too, that they like he doesn't smoke or drink or do any of like the the things you expect from a tired animator. He just sits at his table and drinks tea and surfs.
Wow. Sounds healthy.
Yeah.
Outside of all the overworking you must be doing.
I should take up that lifestyle from him. But okay, why don't we get into the actual clips from the Second Renaissance here in the beginning.
In the beginning, there was man, and for a time, it was good. But humanity's so-called civil societies soon fell victim to vanity and corruption. Then man made the machine in his own likeness.
Pardon me. Coming through.
So yeah, we get to see a B166ER type unit doing. I like him getting bit by a robo-dog. That's fun.
Robot against robot. Yeah, I didn't know this was a comic story, but it makes sense that it would be highlighted like this one story of this robot.
And it also fits in with where the Wachowskis were going a lot more of like, oh, this is like a story out of the Bible. Like it's a very biblical telling of something too. Though the imagery is more Buddhist, like Maeda, especially the zoom in on the instructor in the archives. That's much more in the like both Indian and Japanese Buddhist tradition than American Christianity.
Okay. Should we talk about the Codename Kids Next Door parody of this?
Oh, yeah, let's talk about that.
What's the name of the episode again?
Operation Archive.
Yes, that's all on YouTube illegally, but just watch it. It's a very faithful parody of this Animatrix short. I didn't know the show was that clever or well animated, but
shot for shot,
yeah.
all the commentary. Yeah, it's crazy.
We watched it. A lot of spankings involved.
They replaced the horrific violence of this with spankings, which is nice. It makes it happier. There's some imagery in this that is hard to see.
Yeah, I mean, up front it was very much like the anime, not for kids, fucked up imagery.
That was on the DVD. And actually, they had the classic, red text, parental advisory, and white text on the DVD. That's like, this is not for kids. This is a cartoon, but it's not for kids. Like it felt like Warner really covering their ass there.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot more to say in this short, but it did feel like classic, like OVA style violence is happening in this.
The others don't feel as much. This is the one that feels the most like I think it in World Record. They feel the most like an 80s OVA hyper-violent thing, like it, or super stylistic, but kind of the hyper-violence in this. It feels very OVA of what
really
we were
does.
seeing in America anyway. I like the vision of the decadence of humanity, and also I think some of these panning CGI shots are just Maeda showing off that like, oh, this is what I can do with a real budget of CGI instead of the limited thing I was doing on Blue Submarine #6.
And I mean, this is now 17 years old, all of this stuff, but none of it, the CGI was too distracting to me. Like a lot of it, I was looking at like, oh, you could show this now and it's fine.
I think it helps that it's very like art driven, that the designs Maeda did for the robots were ones that look smooth in CGI instead of being like overly accented and would look bad in CGI.
Yeah, it helps that most of the CGI are like robots and spaceships, like Futurama.
Yeah. Very smooth robots too. I also think like some of the parallelism in this is just so on the nose that it offends you with its obviousness. Beyond the violence of it offends you with its obviousness. But Yeah, so they talk about how the robots are basically building a pyramid, like they are the biblical slaves of Israel in a couple shots here. But the robots crosswalk and everything. I like that they have a little like robot sign even on the crosswalk.
You can tell
there.
that they're second-class citizens.
And definitely, I mean, this is like, I think the parts that spoke to me the most in here were like how they show at the party, they ignore robots like hired help or just like, well, yeah, you're not a person. I don't look at you.
It just it makes me ask those questions like, why did you make it a humanoid thing? Like when you go to like the car factory, a C-3PO is not building a car. It's a giant arm, just like putting things on a belt and twisting things. Like make the serving robot like a portable like hand that moves around. Like it's weird that they made. Again, I'm asking all these questions. Like, why did you make all these things humans? You're wasting a lot of resources.
I think the instructors narration of saying like made them in their own image, in their vanity. Like that's
I guess
the
that
best
does gloss
excuse
over
you're
that.
getting. That's the best excuse you're going to get.
Well, that lets me know that they're at least thinking of it. You know.
Yeah,
like,
yeah. But they only have so many things. Well, and talk about historical parallelism. They then go to the B166ER case, which is like he murders his entire family and all of their
and
pets.
the pets too.
Yeah.
Oof.
It's that's one difference. In the cartoon, I think he kills cats. But in the comic, the owner has a bunch of chihuahuas, and it's actually even more graphically violent what they do to those pets.
I think I saw a cat and a dog dead.
Okay.
in that like surveillance camera shot.
In the comics, it's just a shitload of
Jeez.
chihuahuas specifically horribly destroyed. The speech the speech that's given that you can kind of half hear in the background about the humanity of B166ER, it's taken directly from the comic online, had like the full closing argument text, like just as text, not as a page in the comic. And it's that speech. And the speech is saying like, there was the Dred Scott case 200 years ago. We don't want to repeat history in the Supreme Court today. Actually, I have a little clip of it here at the trial.
It was not long before seeds of dissent took root. Though loyal and pure, the machines earned no respect from their masters, these strange, endlessly multiplying mammals.
Robert Perkins is hearing the prosecution's closing statement. It is expected to be the final day of the B166ER trial.
B166ER, a name that will never be forgotten, for he was the first of his kind to rise up against his masters.
That instrument provides for and secures to the citizens of the United States. On the contrary, they were at that time considered as a subordinate and inferior class.
At B166ER's murder trial, the prosecution argued for an owner's right to destroy property. B166ER testified that he simply did not want to die.
And that's when the most graphic violence in the whole thing is of the ripping the head open to the brain, which, again, I think Maeda wouldn't have even done it, but that is exactly how Jeff Darrow drew it in the comics.
Oh, really?
So,
okay. Yeah. I didn't see any like shots of the comics. So.
Well, okay. Actually, the head being squished in, that is totally in the comics. The embellishment of the ripping the head open and a brain is there.
Yeah.
That's from the anime. Like,
that's some classic anime hyperviolence.
I wondered if he was like, "Oh, this is what you want, right?
Yeah.
You guys liked Akira. I can give you Akira. Sure."
I was also thinking like this is from a simpler, earlier time in our history where a lot of the sci-fi ideas were just like, oh, what if we make robots do everything and then they turn on us? Now I think the idea is like, well, when we make robots do everything, what do we do? Like, how do we make money now? I think that's more of a more realistic like sci-fi premise than the robot overthrow of humanity.
Well, this is also like classic sci-fi here of just, taking a tale of inequality and just changing it to like, but what if the minority instead was X? Like in this case, it's like, what if it was AI?
I played that game, Detroit Beyond Human or whatever. I've never played it, but it seems sort of like this too.
Very similar, yeah. But again, they did it 15 years after this movie, so a little even less creative, I'd say. And this is where like the very on the nose stuff starts up, the Million Machine March, which I do like that the news reporters are like, liberal sympathizers are with the march. Like, I wonder if that dub thing was done after seeing like Iraq war or Afghanistan war protests and how liberal protesters are mentioned by the media.
Yeah, one thing that set me up to think I wouldn't like this Animatrix stuff is just like all of the stereotypical quote unquote anime stuff was up front here with like the violence, and then there's like sexual violence against like a woman who you later find is an android, like her clothes being ripped off and stuff. I'm just like, boy, what's the tone here?
Yeah,
it improves, but like starting off with this, I can see why if you're not like on board, it could easily throw you off.
And then like bringing in these very real world like horrors of the specifics of like the Vietnam War execution photo, or the Tiananmen Square kind of thing. Like I think what Maeda was going for, I was just talking about a universal sense of it. Like the Dred Scott case is famous to Americans, but if you want to talk to, a global audience about inequality, you do need to pull from different sources. So using a shot from the Vietnam War, Tiananmen Square, maybe that does universalize it more. Then came the most disturbing imagery of the whole movie, which I actually think the execution is well done, because it's like you think you're about to see one form of horrible violence, and then instead it's like taken to a different angle on it of just like, no, this isn't them attacking a human woman and tearing her clothes off. It is them bashing a woman robot in the head and then shooting it in the back.
That was surprising. Yeah, that was it could have been worse, I think.
It's all horribly uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And
I guess it's supposed to be, but yeah.
But also, it was also disturbing right down to right as it's shot, it's screaming like, "I'm real." Like that sucked. Like it was so hard to watch. And it's disturbing. I feel bad for any listeners who saw that for the first time and didn't know it was coming.
Like a lot of these stories have sad or dire endings, and it starts off with like the darkest stuff, the darkest, saddest stuff.
I guess to get you ready for it, I suppose. But and then this just keeps building and building until they even get to like fucking mass graves, just like World War II or other war crime style mass graves of just robots
underwater.
Well, and stood up in a line and shot in the back.
Oh,
and,
that
like,
too,
take that robot or bashed in the head. It's like, it is horrifying. Like it in that way, it is successful, I suppose, because you're supposed to feel empathy for the robots before the robot, which is, I think, them pushing you to be in a different mental state. Because after you watch The Matrix, you're like, these fucking robots, we're all going to take down AI. And now when you watch this one, you're like, oh, we fucked them
this
first. We earned this. This is America's fault. Or the world's fault. The robots build 0-1, their binary home world in the middle of the desert. And I think that is also where it explains how their AI advanced so much, because in an independent state, they're able to... The AI is building new AI themselves in ways that a human developer wouldn't allow an AI to build. So I think that explains how they improved so much. And also, it explains how flying cars exist in the world of The Matrix. It's because robots made them. They improved it so much. I do got to think that fake car commercial and all the talk of the trade embargo comes from a 1980s Japanese perspective.
Oh, yeah.
Of America rejecting Japanese products, including cars.
Like, we can't compete with this nation of super robot workers.
So instead, you see all these news stories of mostly white politicians saying, we're going to embargo these things. We can't have these things coming here. They're not like... I think probably if you're growing up in 1980s Japan, you were seeing a lot of footage like that. I could be guessing, but I also love that the whole point of The Matrix is they talk about choice all the time, especially in the sequels. So it's funny that the slogan for the car is "It's the only choice." It's really great. And then we head to the UN. So this is the one turn in it as far as history goes that I kind of reject. Is that it shows that the UN is like, they do it as a governing body. It's like, the UN doesn't do that. The UN is not a governing body. They don't put together an army.
They have no power.
It should really, I feel like it should just be America leading the way on this, but instead there's multiple scenes from this point on that show that it's like, no, it's not just America or China doing it. It's all humanity united together against the robots.
I feel like if made today, they could just say, "Oh, it was America that led us down this path," because that's not a dangerous commentary to make now. I don't think.
And I think the funniest scene in the whole DVD, unintentionally maybe, or slightly intentionally, is when the AI robots arrive in their like top hat and underwear holding an apple. Like it feels like they totally just misread the room and they're like, hey, we're like humans like you. See, we wear underpants.
Who likes apples?
Who likes apples?
We brought one.
It's also an Adam and Eve thing.
Oh,
too.
for sure. So obviously.
And talk about embellishment, the apple rotting and turning into a brain and a nervous system. But, they got to do something for the cliffhanger from part 1 to part 2. So I get it. But
I didn't get why this was 2 things and not just a one long short.
I would think it just comes down to budget wise that the production company demanded these be 7 to 10 minutes for however they're going to be presented online, that if it was a 20-minute thing, they couldn't sell it the same way.
Okay.
So I'm thinking that was just like the demands of form from the production side of things. Part 2 picks right back where it left off with the Genesis tone of like saying there was light and then there wasn't. And I kind of like the carpet bombing is also very horrific looking, but accurate. And I like too that it's useless because they're using bombs for people on robots that it doesn't work on.
They're just like nuking them, right?
Yeah, all this radiation and heat, which I still think would fuck up a robot, but they can go underground and they don't need air, so it doesn't like fully destroy them, I suppose. Yeah, the arm conflict just gets hot and heavy. Like, I love all the robot designs that Maeda did. Like, there's some very cool specifics of the robots fighting against humanity. And as it's not working, they then come to the final solution.
But unlike their former masters with their delicate flesh, the machines had little to fear of the bomb's radiation and heat. Thus did 01's troops advance outwards in every direction. And one after another, mankind surrendered its territories. So the leaders of men conceived of their most desperate strategy yet, a final solution. The destruction of the sky.
Didn't think that one through, guys.
Nope. No.
It's like Scratchy opening the paper saying you need the sun to live.
Didn't they watch the last episode of Dinosaurs to know this is dangerous? Like,
nope.
Yes, this is the pedanticest moment for me in it, just because, one, I'm like, well, why are the AI solar powered? Have they not thought to move on to like nuclear chain reaction or just fossil fuel or some other power source than solar at that point?
But maybe like as a last resort, we would do this, and it seems like it was, but it's just like, no, the entire ecosystem relies on the sun, like the entire food chain. Like what's happening?
Now, I mean, I do find it very believable that a bunch of frothing military officers would applaud the death of the world because they think they would win. But I also think that, again, goes too far into obviousness that the hooting and hollering then, like, fades to a skeleton clapping. Oh, it's their death. Like,
yeah. I think, again, these are the weakest shorts for me. And what I didn't like is like, okay, we're going to show scenes of horrific war and violence. Time for some badass Matrix music. Yeah.
But I think the anti-military imagery like came at a weird time too in June 2003 as we are actively invading Iraq at the time of it. Like,
yeah. I did enjoy just the horror of this and the hopelessness, but the music is just so wrong for this scene. And it didn't distract me at any other point during this entire Animatrix run, but here I was like, whoa, this is way wrong.
I saw from people say like the when I posted a GIF of the Death Rider robot, that they said I could hear this clip, like I can hear this GIF, like it's very iconic to some people. I think again, it just becomes a music video at this point. Really.
It really is. Yeah. It's a really lots of horrific violence, lots of cool robot designs, and just brutality all around.
Yeah. No, I mean, and they also make the destruction of the skies like just look totally horrifying too. Like it is in general not a celebration of war at all. It's just like, yeah, it makes it everything's awful in wartime. You shouldn't do it. War's bad. And also, I thought it was interesting too that they show that like multiple religions are being practiced by the soldiers. Like they're all praying to.
Oh yeah.
Some are praying to Buddhists to get help. Oh, there's some televangelist TV being walked
Wheeled
around.
through, yeah.
And even like what I believe is two Muslim soldiers like going to their knees in prayer at the start of it. So it's very defined by the multiculturalism of it, which is very strange to me. But yeah, it's really long. Like the dwindling soldiers like losing their minds on the field, and also the way the one is like ripped out of his robo suit with it, but his arms and legs stay. Whew, boy, like. I do think at least Maeda was enjoying the high budget on it that he was working with. Like, I also think there are a few moments in this where them not working on. I didn't confirm for sure, but I think a lot of these are not working off of an English language. Like they didn't record the voice beforehand, I think, in a lot of these. I think it was more like temp track stuff, so that's why there's some lip sync that's really off in a lot of these.
Yeah, I sort of got the same feeling, especially in the world record short.
Yeah. Well, and also, I love the voice actors. Many of them are some of my favorite professionals in voice acting, but they are also who you hire on a dub, more expensive dub, but a dub. This is not Hollywood voice acting budget they're doing here. The whole sequence just breaks down a music video. You see everybody falling apart. I do like from a certain point of view, humanity actually saved themselves because by blocking out the sun, they made themselves essential to the AI to be the battery.
Oh. Yeah, that's so obvious. I didn't know why I didn't think of it. I guess it was them writing themselves out of the weird plot hole. Like, a human is a really ineffective battery.
Yeah, why would you ever
doing?
do that? Yeah. So I had to, that's there right from the first movie when they say it was our idea to blot out, this is Morpheus' whole speech.
Okay.
It was our idea to blot out the skies. We thought it would make them lose their power, but they found another efficient battery.
Oh, I forgot about that line in the movie. Okay.
So this is just extrapolating from that, but you're right. Once you see it actually play out in time, they're like, so they capture POWs, find out like, oh, you know what? If we make them dream, we get a lot of body heat from them. So cool. All right. And then we'll build basically Christmas trees full of people. There's even that wall of screaming nude people like that. Again, a horrifying image. Same with all of like the biological warfare on the other soldiers, like just them and their gurneys, just with the maggots. Again, very 80s OVA.
Yeah, all horrifying. And we do see like a little bit of the machine starting to figure out, man, like, I think they're making the guy like laugh and cry after they like jack into his brain.
Well, speaking of American things that got inspiration from this, the screaming wall of people, like Rick and Morty did that straight up in an episode.
Yeah. You're right about that.
Maybe that's why all the Mortys were naked as well. It was because like, well, they were nude in the Animatrix, so we got to do it too.